Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a place where two great rivers wind through a dark and shimmering plain. You find yourself standing beneath a velvet Mesopotamian sky, scattered with stars that seem close enough to pluck like tiny lanterns. The air is warm but not stifling, a dry breeze brushing against your cheeks as if welcoming you into another world. All around, the land hums with a quiet history, like a city that never truly sleeps, just exhales slowly through the centuries. Somewhere nearby, a distant jackal calls, and your footsteps crunch softly over packed earth. It's peaceful now, but don't get too romantic. If you'd actually been dropped here 5,000 years ago without sunscreen, bug spray, or a tetanus shot, you probably wouldn't survive the night. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward slowly, and the ground beneath you begins to change. This is the cradle of civilization, the wide, fertile floodplain between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. In the dark, the landscape is a patchwork of fields and low mounds, scattered with the ghostly outlines of ancient walls. By day, these places would have bustled with farmers, potters, merchants, and builders. By night, everything slows into a kind of suspended breath. The bricks hold the day's heat, the canals reflect moonlight, and somewhere out there, a temple waits, rising gently above the horizon. This is Mesopotamia, literally the land between rivers. Here, some of the world's earliest cities took shape: Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Nippur. Names that sound like whispers carried through clay tablets. These were places of firsts. The first written records, the first codified laws, the first large-scale temples. But before any of that could exist, there had to be architecture. People needed walls to keep the wind out, roofs to shade them from the sun, and shared spaces that gathered the community together. You move along what might once have been a processional route, long and straight, now softened into a dirt path. Off to the side, faint lumps mark where structures once stood. It's hard to picture now, but thousands of years ago, this land was filled with brick buildings coated in plaster, their walls painted white to reflect the heat. At night, oil lamps would glow from courtyards, casting gentle light into narrow streets. A stray goat might wander by, someone would be closing a reed door for the night. The air would carry the faint scent of baked bread and mud. One mainstream historical fact stands quietly here. Mesopotamia is widely considered the birthplace of urban civilization. Uruk, in particular, grew into what is often called the world's first true city, around 3200 BCE. It sprawled over hundreds of hectares, home to tens of thousands of people. It had monumental buildings, organized street systems, and, crucially, architecture that communicated both function and power. When you look out over this imagined landscape, you're looking at humanity's first experiments with living together in dense, permanent settlements. But here's a quirkier detail. Many of those early monumental buildings weren't entirely new. Archaeologists have found that beneath major temples like those at Eridu, there are layer upon layer of earlier structures, like a stack of historical lasagna. Every few centuries, people would fill in the old temple and build a new one right on top, slightly larger and fancier. Over time, the ground rose, creating artificial mounds called tells that still dot the landscape today. So when you walk across what seems like an ordinary hill, you might actually be strolling over 2,000 years of religious renovations. And of course, historians still argue whether urbanization here happened rapidly through centralized planning or whether it was a slow, organic process of villages knitting themselves together over centuries. Some say powerful temple institutions pulled people in like magnets. Others imagine sprawling networks of farmers gradually merging into a single urban organism. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, swirling like silt in a canal. You continue walking. The stars wheel overhead. The rivers themselves are out of sight, but you can feel their presence. The way the land dips ever so slightly toward ancient canals. The whisper of reeds along unseen banks. Water shaped everything here. Floods brought fertile soil, but they also demanded cooperation. If you wanted your mud brick house to last more than a single season, you had to plan carefully. Architecture wasn't just about aesthetics. It was survival engineering in a landscape that alternated between abundance and disaster. As you near the outline of what might have been a city gate, you imagine workers pressing wet clay into molds, forming thousands upon thousands of bricks. No steel beams, no cranes, just human hands, river mud, straw, and patience. Once dried, or sometimes baked in kilns, these bricks became the bones of cities. You can almost hear the quiet rhythm: press, lift, stack, repeat. It's oddly soothing, like the world's oldest ASMR loop. The gate towers ahead are mostly gone now, but once they would have framed the entrance to a bustling world. Traders from distant lands brought goods through here: lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, tin and copper for bronze making. Architecture wasn't isolated. It sat at the intersection of trade, belief, and daily life. Every wall you pass feels like it remembers a conversation. You pause for a moment on a low wall. It's warm against your hand, as if the sun only set a moment ago. In the distance, a ziggurat shape begins to rise faintly against the night sky, its terraces layered like a sleepy wedding cake. That, however, is a story for the next stretch of our journey. For now, you let the sounds of ancient Mesopotamia settle around you. The croak of frogs in canals, the rustle of palm fronds, the distant creak of a wooden water-lifting shaduf. It's astonishing how this place, often presented in textbooks as dry chronology, comes alive when you walk through it in your mind. You're not just learning facts, you're wandering through them, one quiet step at a time. The stars reflect in a thin canal. A brick arch frames your view ahead. And somewhere beneath your feet, layers of temples wait like buried memories. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight and calm of a world that laid the foundation, quite literally, for everything that came after. You step forward slowly, your sandals, or more likely, your imaginary bare feet, pressing into soft, yielding earth. Under the thin layer of dust, the ground has the damp, slightly sticky give of clay. It clings to your toes, cool from the night air, and for a brief moment, you understand the raw material that built a civilization. Mesopotamia didn't have endless forests to provide timber, nor convenient quarries full of marble. What it had, endlessly, stubbornly, was mud. The same stuff that squishes between your toes became the foundation of cities, temples, palaces, and homes. And as the night deepens around you, you find yourself drifting toward the ruins of a neighborhood where the first humble mud brick walls still stand like ancient puzzle pieces. Somewhere in the dark, you hear a rhythmic squelching sound. Imagine a line of workers at the riverbank, scooping wet clay into wooden molds. They mix it with chopped straw, nature's own rebar, to give it strength. Then they slap the molds down on the ground, smooth the tops with wet hands, and let the bricks dry in the hot Mesopotamian sun. There's no mechanical conveyor belt here, just thousands of patient hands repeating the same simple action, day after day. Press, lift, smooth. Press, lift, smooth. It's almost meditative, a communal choreography of mud and sweat. These sun-dried bricks are surprisingly sturdy, but they're not immortal. One mainstream historical fact illustrates their importance. Almost every major Mesopotamian building, from the smallest home to the grandest ziggurat, used mud brick as its core material. Even monumental temples and city walls relied on this humble substance, with occasional baked brick facings for added durability. Because the bricks were relatively lightweight, builders could shape structures flexibly, adjusting layouts as they went. And here's the quirky part. Because the bricks weren't permanent, people often simply built new walls right on top of the old ones. Over centuries, buildings rose like layer cakes. Floors climbed upward as residents filled in earlier rooms with rubble and fresh bricks. Some Mesopotamian houses ended up several meters higher than the original street level. So you could have lived in the same house as your great-great-grandparents, just on the second or third vertical iteration. It's a bit like repeatedly renovating your kitchen by just building a new one on top of the old one, forever. Historians still argue whether this upward building was a deliberate urban planning strategy or just a series of pragmatic quick fixes. Some believe people intentionally raised floors to combat periodic flooding from the rivers. Others suggest it was more about convenience. Why clear away old walls when you can just cover them? Whatever the reason, the result was a landscape where buildings slowly climbed toward the sky, without anyone ever inventing elevators. You move into the shell of what was once a house. The walls rise only waist-high now, but in your mind, you can reconstruct the space. Imagine a small central courtyard with rooms opening off it like petals around the flower. The floor is tamped earth, perhaps covered with woven mats. The walls are thick, not for decoration, but to keep out the relentless heat. By day, they would have absorbed sunlight. By night, they released it slowly, creating a surprisingly comfortable indoor climate. As you run your hand along the wall, the surface crumbles slightly, leaving a soft grit on your fingertips. It smells faintly of rain, though rain here was rare and precious. When a storm did roll through, the mud brick structures were vulnerable. That's why many buildings were coated with plaster, sometimes mixed with bitumen, a natural tar found bubbling up from the earth. This layer helped protect against erosion. In some cities, walls were even whitewashed, turning entire neighborhoods into glowing sun-reflecting clusters. If you squint, you can almost see them under a blazing summer sun. Bright, uniform, quietly beautiful. A thin canal runs nearby, glinting under starlight. This water source wasn't just for drinking, it provided the clay for brick making. Workers dug clay pits that, over time, turned into ponds and then into mosquito playgrounds. It's one of those little historical ironies. The very resource that allowed Mesopotamian architecture to flourish also created perfect breeding grounds for insects. Early urban dwellers probably spent plenty of sleepless nights swatting mosquitoes, just like you do at 2 a.m. when you forget to close a window. You step into another structure, this one larger. The bricks here are more uniform, their edges sharply defined even after thousands of years. These might have been kiln-fired bricks, tougher and longer lasting. Baked bricks were expensive though. They required fuel, which was scarce. Builders used them selectively, often for important facades, drainage channels, or the lowest courses of walls that touched damp ground. It's like ancient architectural budgeting. Splurge on the front porch, economize everywhere else. The soft sound of night insects fills the air as you imagine the process of stacking these bricks. Without mortar as we know it, builders relied on mud slurry to stick the bricks together. Each layer had to be perfectly aligned. Over time, the weight of the upper layers compressed the lower ones, creating surprisingly stable structures. Some mud brick walls in places like and Nippur have survived in recognizable form for over 4 millennia. Not bad for glorified dirt. A gentle breeze moves through the empty space, and your mind drifts toward how people must have experienced their homes. Thick walls, small windows, cool floors. It was architecture shaped by climate long before anyone invented air conditioning. And because mud brick was so easy to work with, homeowners could modify their spaces as family needs changed. Add a room for a new baby? Easy. Expand the courtyard? Just press more bricks. It's architectural flexibility in its purest form. Here's another odd tidbit. Some Mesopotamian builders embedded broken pottery and pebbles into their brick walls for extra strength. It's like early experimental composite material. Archaeologists occasionally find bits of decorated pottery shards poking through walls. accidental mosaics left behind by pragmatic builders. As you stand in the middle of these low ruins, the scale of the innovation starts to settle in. You're not looking at a single grand monument built by some visionary king. You're surrounded by millions of small, anonymous contributions. Each brick was shaped by hand, dried in the sun, and laid in place by ordinary people. Cities weren't conjured into existence, they were stacked slowly, patiently, brick upon brick. You tilt your head and imagine rain clouds rolling in from the distant Zagros mountains. A sudden downpour hits the city. The streets become slick with mud. Roofs, made of palm trunks covered in reeds and clay, leak in places. The walls darken as they absorb moisture. Residents scramble to repair cracks before the water does too much damage. This cycle of building, repairing, and rebuilding defined life here. Nothing was ever truly finished. Everything was a work in progress. Historians still debate the extent to which this mud brick technology influenced later architectural traditions. Some argue it laid the groundwork for monumental stone architecture by providing basic design templates, rectangular layouts, courtyards, buttressed walls. Others think it remained its own unique tradition, adapted to the landscape and climate in ways stone couldn't replicate. Either way, these humble bricks built the foundation, literally and culturally, for civilizations to come. You walk out of the last house and onto a raised street. Under the moonlight, the mud brick walls cast soft, blurry shadows. There's something deeply calming about this material. It's close to the earth, simple, and quiet. It doesn't demand attention like marble columns or Gothic spires. It just holds space, absorbs time, and eventually returns to the soil from which it came. Somewhere ahead, a larger structure looms faintly against the sky. Its shape is different, terraced, monumental. You know what's coming next. But for now, you take one last look at the mud brick foundations beneath your feet. Without these quiet wonders, the ziggurats and temples ahead would have had nothing to stand on. You step out of the quiet neighborhood and onto a broad, packed earth avenue. The night sky stretches endlessly above you, and in the distance, a silhouette begins to emerge against the stars. At first, it looks like a natural hill, something the wind might have sculpted over centuries. But as you draw nearer, the shape sharpens into terraces, steps, and edges, massive and deliberate. This is no hill. This is a ziggurat, a stepped temple that once reached toward the heavens like a sleepy, tiered mountain made of clay. Your feet sink slightly into the dust as you approach. Each step brings you closer to a structure that dominated ancient Mesopotamian skylines. Long before steel skyscrapers and Gothic cathedrals, these towering platforms rose from flat plains, visible for miles around. They were both architectural statements and spiritual beacons. In a world where rivers flooded unpredictably and storms swept down from distant mountains, a ziggurat stood firm, unblinking, a mountain made by human hands. They were built as temple platforms, not as tombs or palaces. Unlike the Egyptian pyramids, which housed pharaohs in their afterlife, ziggurats supported temples on their flat tops. The structure itself was solid, no internal chambers, essentially a massive, layered pedestal. The temple at the summit, often called the House of the God, was thought to be the deity's earthly dwelling place. The structure ahead of you rises in 3 broad tiers, each slightly smaller than the one below. At its base, ramps and stairways cut upward at sharp angles. The bricks, though eroded, still hold their shape. Under moonlight, their rough texture catches the light, and for a moment, the whole thing looks like a giant sandcastle left behind by some divine child. You place your hand against one of the lower walls. It's cool, slightly gritty. These outer layers are made of baked bricks, carefully laid in horizontal courses. Behind them lies a vast interior of sun-dried mud brick, lighter, cheaper, but vulnerable. To keep the massive structure from collapsing under its own weight, builders used clever engineering. They inserted layers of reed mats between brick courses, like ancient shock absorbers. Some even believe these mats helped wick away moisture during heavy rains. And here's a quirky tidbit. The outer baked bricks were often inscribed with the names of the kings who commissioned the ziggurat. Imagine thousands of bricks, each stamped like a little press release, built by Namu, servant of Nana. It's as if every single brick were a tiny Instagram post tagging the king. Not subtle, but definitely effective PR. Historians still argue whether ziggurats were meant to be physically ascended by regular people. Some think only priests and select officials climbed the ramps to the top, performing rituals away from the public eye. Others suggest that on special festival days, processions of citizens might have walked partway up, accompanying statues of gods in grand, slow-moving ceremonies. The truth may have varied from city to city. You begin your ascent, your footsteps echoing softly against the ancient ramp. It's not a staircase in the modern sense, more like a steep, straight ramp flanked by low walls. The climb is gradual but steady, and you can feel how this journey itself was meant to be part of the ritual. As you rise, the city unfurls behind you like a patterned quilt. Mudbrick houses cluster together, canals glint faintly, distant palm groves ripple in the breeze. Halfway up, you pause to catch your breath, not because the climb is too hard, but because the view is strangely moving. Imagine what it must have felt like thousands of years ago, climbing toward the temple while the first light of dawn spread across the plain. Incense smoke curling upward, priests in long robes chanting softly. A statue of a god, polished and gleaming, slowly lifted along the ramp. For the people below, this sight would have been both ordinary and otherworldly, a reminder that their city's heart was not in the palace, but in the temple above. Another breeze brushes against your face, carrying with it the faint, sticky scent of bitumen. Builders often use this tar-like substance to seal the lower levels of ziggurats against water damage. The Tigris and Euphrates didn't always behave politely. Floods could be catastrophic. Bitumen acted like waterproofing, preventing the lowest bricks from turning back into mush. It's messy stuff, sticky, smelly, but astonishingly effective. Even today, you can sometimes spot black streaks of it clinging to ruins like ancient caulk. You climb the next tier. Up close, you can see the careful brickwork. No fancy decorative flourishes here, just precise, rhythmic layering. But the simplicity is deceptive. Each layer had to be aligned perfectly, or the entire structure could slump outward over time. These builders didn't have laser levels or rebar. They relied on rope grids, wooden plumb bobs, and practiced eyes. It's a quiet kind of genius, the kind that doesn't scream for attention, but stands for millennia anyway. And there's another curious historical footnote. Some ziggurats may have been painted in vibrant colors. Archaeologists have found traces of pigments suggesting that different tiers might have been coated in blues, reds, or whites. Imagine the structure not as a dusty brown ruin, but as a towering, color-blocked monument gleaming in the sun. The top temple might have shone with bright plaster or even metallic accents, reflecting light like a beacon. It's like discovering that your favorite black and white movie was originally filmed in Technicolor. Historians still debate whether the ziggurat symbolized a literal ladder to the heavens or a symbolic cosmic mountain. Some texts describe them as linking earth and sky, while others focus on their role as platforms for divine presence. Perhaps both are true. Standing here, halfway up in the quiet night, it's easy to imagine both interpretations at once. You reach the top tier, where the temple would have stood. Only its foundations remain now, stone outlines and scattered bricks. But in your mind, the structure reappears. A small temple, rectangular and modest, stands under the stars. Its walls are plastered white, its doorways draped with woven reed mats. Inside, oil lamps flicker. An altar holds offerings, bread, beer, dates. Statues of gods gaze outward with unblinking stone eyes. The air is thinner here, cooler. The city below is hushed, distant. It's a view reserved for priests, kings, and the gods themselves. This was the spiritual heart of Mesopotamian cities, a place where heaven touched earth, where rituals synchronized human life with cosmic order. You walk slowly around the perimeter, looking down at the ramps you climbed. The wind catches your hair. Somewhere below, a dog barks. A single oil lamp still burns faintly in one of the lower courtyards, like a distant star. Here's a final quirky note before you descend. Some later ziggurats may have had gardens or terraces with plants, possibly irrigated by cleverly designed systems. While this idea inspired the later legends of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, historians still argue whether those gardens were real, mythologized, or simply misattributed ziggurat terraces. The debate goes on like a scholarly tug-of-war over who got the better ancient landscaping. You begin your slow walk down, feeling the gentle pull of gravity. Each step is quieter than the last. The ziggurat looms behind you, its terraces blending back into the night. For the people who built it, this was more than architecture. It was a bridge between worlds, a literal and symbolic climb towards something greater. And as you reach the bottom, the massive structure stands silent once more, a sleeping mountain of brick and devotion. Ahead, faint doorways and courtyards wait, inviting you to explore the intimate spaces that lay beneath these monumental forms. You step away from the base of the ziggurat, leaving its silent terraces behind like a dream that lingers faintly after waking. Ahead, the city unfolds into winding streets and open spaces. The air cools slightly as you turn into a narrow lane lined with mud brick walls, their surfaces smooth and pale in the moonlight. A soft rustling sound comes from above, woven reed mats flapping gently on flat rooftops where families once gathered after sunset. Here, the monumental gives way to the personal. This is the world of courtyards and cool breezes, where everyday architecture responded to a hot, unpredictable climate with quiet brilliance. The people of ancient Mesopotamia may not have had electric fans or air conditioning, but they understood airflow like seasoned engineers. You pass through a doorway, low enough that you have to duck slightly, and step into a small enclosed courtyard. The walls rise around you like a protective cocoon. Above, the night sky is perfectly framed in a rectangular cutout. The courtyard is the beating heart of the house, a place where light filters in, breezes circulate, and daily life unfolds. Imagine clay jars stacked in the corner, a low table in the center, perhaps a goat wandering lazily through. This space is both practical and serene, designed to manage heat and bring comfort in a landscape that could be unforgiving. One mainstream historical fact comes to life here. Mesopotamian houses typically revolved around an open central courtyard, with rooms arranged around its perimeter. This design provided ventilation, privacy, and temperature regulation. During the day, the thick outer walls shielded the interior from the sun. At night, the open courtyard released the accumulated heat, allowing cooler air to flow through. In many ways, it's the ancestor of modern passive cooling systems, except without the need for a power bill. You run your fingers along the inner wall. The plaster feels faintly cool, even at night, as if the house itself breathes in rhythm with the environment. The windows here are small and positioned high up, more for ventilation than for views. In a world without glass, big open windows would have just meant dust storms in your living room. Instead, narrow openings near the roof let hot air escape while pulling cooler air inward. It's ingenious in its simplicity. And here's a quirky detail. Many houses had rooftop sleeping areas, complete with reed mats or lightweight canopies. When summer nights grew stifling, families climbed simple ladders to the roof and slept under the stars, hoping for a breeze. Archaeological evidence suggests people even placed jars of water on the roof to cool overnight and used them the next day. You can almost picture it now. Children dozing on woven mats, adults whispering softly, and the lazy cat prowling the edge of the roof, pretending to guard everyone from imaginary thieves. Historians still argue whether these courtyard-centered homes were influenced by earlier nomadic tent structures or whether they emerged organically from sedentary urban life. Some see them as a natural continuation of tent layouts, with the courtyard acting like a central pole translated into brick. Others believe they were unique urban innovations responding to new population densities. Either way, the design stuck around. It's still common in many Middle Eastern homes today, a quiet architectural lineage stretching back 5 millennia. You step into one of the surrounding rooms. It's small and dim, with a low ceiling supported by palm trunks. The air is still, heavy with the earthy sense of clay. A niche is carved into the wall, perhaps once used to store jars, idols, or lamps. These rooms weren't meant to be spacious. They were functional, cozy, and easy to keep cool. Thick walls muffled the noise of the street, creating a sense of calm inside. In wealthier homes, courtyards were larger, sometimes with a small basin or decorative element at the center to enhance cooling. Some even featured baked brick pavements to keep the floor smooth and clean. But even in modest dwellings, the courtyard served as the anchor. Here, families cooked, chatted, mended clothes, stored food, and sometimes conducted small-scale business. Architecture wasn't just about shelter, it shaped social rhythms. A faint breeze stirs. You tilt your head upward and watch as warm air rises out of the courtyard's open top. It's easy to imagine this same movement during the day, when the sun baked the exterior walls, but the courtyard's shaded recesses remained temperate. The layout was perfectly adapted to the environment, without needing thermostats, ducts, or buzzing appliances. Here's another quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found evidence that some courtyards were decorated with simple geometric wall paintings or embedded pottery shards, adding texture and color. It wasn't all mud brown. Homeowners sometimes plastered and painted their walls with red, white, or black pigments. It's not Versailles, but it shows a desire to make spaces beautiful as well as practical. As you walk slowly through the courtyard, you picture daily life settling down for the night. A small oil lamp burns low on a wall niche. Someone's grinding stones are pushed to the side, ready for tomorrow's bread. The heat of the day has finally lifted, replaced by a tranquil rhythm of distant crickets and trickling canal water. You step back out into the street. The walls rise closely on either side, channeling air like a canyon. These narrow lanes weren't accidental. They provided shade during the day and created wind tunnels that cooled the city naturally. At night, they become hushed corridors where neighbors exchanged soft greetings and stray dogs wandered like self-appointed night guards. One thing that often surprises modern visitors is how private Mesopotamian houses were. Unlike later Roman or Greek houses that often faced outward with columned facades, Mesopotamian homes turned inward. Their blank exterior walls faced the street, while all the openings and life happened in the courtyard. From the outside, a house might look like a plain block of mud brick. Inside, it was a living, breathing world. Historians still debate the social meaning behind this inward focus. Some argue it reflects cultural values of privacy and family life. Others think it was purely environmental. Likely, it was both. Living in a hot, dusty climate encouraged inward-looking architecture, but cultural norms shaped how those spaces were used. As you wander further, you reach a larger courtyard, this one part of a palace or administrative complex. Palm beams support a series of shaded walkways around the edges. A faint echo lingers here, as if voices from long ago are still bouncing between the walls. Officials once paced here, scribes wrote on clay tablets in the shade, and servants fetched water from nearby canals. Even the grandest spaces used the same principles: thick walls, small windows, courtyards at the core. If you lived here, your best air conditioner would have been your roof, and your thermostat, Probably a jar of cold water and a fan made of palm fronds. Simple, effective, and completely off-grid. As you lean against the wall, the breeze brushes your face again, gentle and rhythmic, like the city itself is exhaling. These courtyard-centered homes and palaces weren't just buildings, they were finely tuned climate machines, designed through centuries of observation and adaptation. The night deepens. Oil lamps flicker out one by one. Families climb their rooftops to sleep. Courtyards fall into silence, and the only sounds are the rustle of reeds and the occasional distant bleat of a goat. This architecture doesn't just shelter people, it choreographs their relationship with the air, the light, and the rhythm of the land. Ahead, the quiet courtyard houses give way to something sturdier and more imposing. In the distance, city walls stretch like a protective arm around the sleeping metropolis. You begin walking toward them, the breeze following you like a loyal companion. You follow the narrow street as it bends and widens until the soft hum of the inner city begins to fade behind you. Ahead, the ground slopes gently upward. The moonlight falls across a long, linear form, thick, broad, and patient. It's the city wall, stretching like a great sleeping serpent around the perimeter of ancient life. Silent guards once stood here. Today, only the breeze keeps watch. The closer you get, the more the wall dominates your view. Up close, it's massive. Even in ruins, its foundations rise taller than a person, and you can trace where the original courses climbed much higher. Imagine walking toward this same wall 5,000 years ago. Torches would have lined the ramparts, their flames flickering in the warm night air. Watchmen in wool cloaks leaned on their spears, eyes scanning the horizon for raiders, traders, or troublemakers. Somewhere, a dog barked from the gatehouse. One mainstream historical fact about Mesopotamian cities is that many of them were surrounded by thick defensive walls made primarily of mudbrick, sometimes reinforced with baked brick at the base. These fortifications weren't just symbolic. They were practical responses to the constant push and pull between city-states, nomadic groups, and rival kingdoms. The earliest known walls in Mesopotamia date back to the Uruk period, around 3000 BCE. In some places, like Uruk itself, the wall is said to have stretched nearly 10 kilometers, enclosing an area that rivaled later classical cities in scale. You place your hand on the wall's surface. The bricks are rougher here than in the courtyards and homes you explored earlier. These were functional, designed to endure both weather and warfare. At intervals, you can see the stumps of what were once buttresses, protruding supports that strengthen the structure against pressure and erosion. At night, their shadows form rhythmic patterns along the ground, like ancient Morse code. And here's a quirky tidbit: some Mesopotamian walls were wide enough on top for chariots to patrol. Archaeological evidence from cities like Nineveh suggests broad parapets and ramps leading to the top, allowing soldiers and carts to move quickly along the perimeter. Imagine a small two-wheeled chariot creaking across this surface under the stars, pulled by donkeys with tassels on their harnesses. Not exactly NASCAR speeds, but certainly efficient for Bronze Age security rounds. Historians still argue whether these walls were primarily defensive or also ceremonial and symbolic. Some scholars point to their enormous scale and careful construction as evidence that they projected power more than they provided actual military advantage. Others emphasize their role in practical defense, especially during periods of intense city-state rivalry. The truth, as usual, probably sits somewhere between intimidation and insurance policy. You begin to walk along the base of the wall. A narrow path follows its curve. On one side, the city, dark, dense, breathing quietly. On the other, open fields stretch toward the rivers, dotted with palm groves and irrigation canals that glisten faintly under the moon. It's easy to imagine centuries scanning this landscape for approaching figures, their silhouettes blending with the shadows of date palms. As you approach a gatehouse, the structure shifts.
The walls thicken, and you see the faint outline of towers that once flanked the entrance. Here, the mudbrick is faced with baked brick, and even traces of bitumen mortar linger between the courses like ancient black glue. Gates were both choke points and stage sets, carefully controlled spaces where traders entered, taxes were collected, and the city could decide who was welcome. Passing through the gate at night feels like stepping through a membrane. The interior side is quiet, almost domestic, while the outer side opens onto the wide, dark landscape. It's easy to forget that ancient Mesopotamian cities didn't exist in isolation. Beyond these walls were networks of fields, villages, and trading routes. Armies marched, caravans creaked, and floods sometimes swept in with little warning. The wall stood as a line between the predictable and the unpredictable, between us and everything else. You glance upward. Imagine the view from up there. Oil lamps set into niches, illuminating the parapets. A few guards leaning against the battlements, whispering to stay awake through the night shift. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was essential. If danger came, they were the first to see it. One light-hearted thought slips in. If you were a guard up there on a slow night, you probably became an expert in cloud shapes, owl gossip, and inventing excuses for nodding off. No, Captain, I was just contemplating the stars very deeply. The structure of the wall itself tells a story of adaptation. Builders had to reckon with the same environmental challenges as the house builders you met earlier. Mudbrick walls, no matter how thick, can crumble in heavy rain. To combat this, many city walls were built on raised platforms or with stone foundations, especially in later periods. Drainage channels were cut into their bases to divert water away during floods. Some even had sloped exterior faces so rainwater would flow down smoothly rather than seep in. Another curious fact, at certain cities, the walls were periodically dismantled and rebuilt, sometimes not because of damage, but as a kind of ritual renewal. In some texts, kings describe tearing down and rebuilding walls to mark new eras of rule, like hitting reset on your security system. Historians still debate the extent to which these massive walls actually deterred attackers. In some cases, raiders simply bypassed them or negotiated their way in. But their psychological power was immense. A towering wall under the moonlight told everyone approaching, "This place is organized. This place is defended. Think twice." You continue walking until you find a staircase built into the wall. It's narrow, steep, and a little uneven, but solid. You climb slowly, each step echoing faintly. When you reach the top, the entire city spreads out before you like a sleeping animal. Courtyards and roofs, canals reflecting stars, the distant bulk of the ziggurat. It's all laid out in quiet patterns. Beyond the wall, the fields stretch toward the dark horizon. A few distant oil lamps mark farmsteads. Maybe a shepherd's fire flickers near a canal. The land is open and exposed, but up here, on the wall, you feel a sense of safety. It's no wonder these ramparts became powerful symbols, not just of defense, but of identity. A city's wall wasn't just a boundary, it was a declaration of existence. You lean against the parapet, letting the wind brush your face. The mud brick beneath your hands is cool, slightly rough, and unwavering. This wall has seen centuries pass. It has been repaired, expanded, battered, and restored. It has stood through the rise and fall of kings, through seasons of abundance and years of drought. Now, under the stars, it simply rests. Another small joke drifts in. Somewhere out there, a would-be invader might have taken one look at this wall and said, "You know what? Let's just go raid somewhere else. Their wall looks smaller." As you descend the stairway and step back inside the city, you pass through the gate again. The interior streets feel narrower, quieter now that you've glimpsed the wide world beyond. Somewhere nearby, you hear the faint trickle of water, a reminder that beyond these walls lie canals and trade routes, and beyond those, the vast and sometimes dangerous unknown.
Ahead, the streets widen again, leading you toward the city's arteries, its canals, markets, and avenues that tie everything together like threads in a loom. The walls protect, but the canals sustain. You take a slow breath, feeling the city's quiet strength at your back as you walk toward the water. You follow the gentle slope downhill, moving away from the thick city walls and toward the soft murmur of something living and flowing. The air shifts slightly, cooler, more humid. A faint glint catches your eye as moonlight dances along the water's surface. You've arrived at the quiet veins of the city, its canals and streets, the intertwined arteries that once carried both goods and gossip through ancient Mesopotamia. In the daytime, this area would have been buzzing. Boats carved from palm trunks would glide through narrow waterways laden with sacks of grain, jars of oil, bundles of reeds, and maybe the occasional nosy goat hitching a ride. Merchants would shout prices, donkeys would clop along the parallel streets, and children would peer over canal edges hoping to spot fish. But now, under the deep night sky, everything rests. The canal water moves almost imperceptibly, and the wide street beside it lies empty, an ancient highway asleep. Mesopotamian cities were intricately connected by networks of canals that doubled as transportation routes and irrigation systems. These canals branched off from the mighty Tigris and Euphrates rivers, feeding water to fields and orchards and allowing barges to transport goods deep into the urban heart. The layout of some cities, like Nippur and Lagash, shows planned canal systems that ran alongside major streets, making them both practical and beautiful in their own muddy way. You crouch by the canal's edge. The mud brick lining is uneven but effective, angled just enough to reduce erosion when the water runs faster during the day. Occasionally, baked bricks were used to reinforce corners or turning points. Ancient Mesopotamian infrastructure upgrades. A few reed fragments cling to the edges, whispering in the light breeze. Somewhere downstream, a frog croaks lazily, probably wondering why someone's hanging around its nighttime haunt. Ancient canal workers were sometimes paid in beer. Records on clay tablets show that rations of beer were standard compensation for laborers digging and maintaining these waterways. So, picture a small crew of sweaty workers in the blazing sun hauling mud and reeds and then clocking out with their daily jug of barley brew. Historians have even joked that Mesopotamian canals were built on carbs and enthusiasm. You start walking alongside the canal. On one side, the water glimmers faintly. On the other, a street stretches out straight and level, wide enough for loaded carts. It's surprisingly well organized. Ancient urban planners, despite working without modern surveying tools, managed to design cities with remarkably regular street grids, especially in later periods like Babylon. Many streets were oriented to catch prevailing breezes or align with canals for easier movement. You can almost hear the echo of wheels and hooves as carts pass by, leaving faint ruts in the packed earth. Historians still argue whether these urban layouts were primarily functional or cosmological. Some see them as purely practical responses to water management and trade. Others suggest that the regularity and orientation may have mirrored celestial patterns, embedding cosmic order into daily movement. As usual, it's likely a blend, a city that was both efficient and spiritually meaningful, because why not have your irrigation system double as a star map? As you continue your midnight stroll, you come upon a small stone bridge, low and sturdy, arched gently over the canal. It's not grand like Roman aqueducts, but it's clever. Mud brick sides, a baked brick walkway, and wooden beams reinforcing the underside. By day, people would cross it constantly, farmers bringing produce in, traders leading animals, priests heading toward the temples. Right now, it's deserted except for a sleepy cat curled in the middle like it owns the place, which, to be fair, it probably does. The bridge gives you a perfect vantage point. Upstream, you can see the canal winding deeper into the city, disappearing behind courtyards and warehouses. Downstream, it opens toward the fields and, eventually, the great river itself. The city's prosperity depends on this flow. If the canals silt up or break, fields dry out, trade halts, and people start complaining loudly in cuneiform. One light joke floats in. Somewhere in ancient Mesopotamia, a canal inspector probably invented the first "I'll get to it next week" maintenance delay. Bureaucracy, it seems, has always been a universal human tradition. The streets themselves are telling. You run your hand over the packed surface. No asphalt, of course, just tamped earth, sometimes sprinkled with crushed pottery or gravel to reduce dust. In wealthy neighborhoods, baked bricks occasionally paved the streets near temples or palaces. But most streets were simple, well-worn tracks shaped by feet, hooves, and wheels. During dry seasons, dust would rise in clouds as carts rolled through. During floods, streets could become temporary canals themselves, leading to dramatic "my donkey's cart is stuck" moments. Some streets were surprisingly narrow, just wide enough for two people to pass, especially in residential quarters. These winding lanes offered shade during the blistering afternoons, keeping homes cooler. The main arteries, though, were broad and straight, designed to handle heavy traffic. Imagine trudging along here with a caravan of donkeys loaded with dates, weaving past boats unloading sacks of barley, all while trying not to trip over a child playing with a clay toy bull. Another quirky fact, some ancient Mesopotamian streets had drains running down their centers, covered with removable slabs. Wastewater from houses was channeled into these drains and then out toward the canals, in a kind of early plumbing system. Not glamorous, but surprisingly advanced. You can almost hear someone yelling, "Don't drop your tablet in the drain again." Historians still debate how strictly these canals and streets were regulated. Some argue that strict royal decrees controlled their maintenance, with overseers and workers assigned to each stretch. Others believe it was more ad hoc, local communities pitching in, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes only after a royal official showed up with a very pointy stick. Either way, the result was a system that sustained some of the earliest cities on Earth for centuries. You wander farther downstream, away from the city center. The canal widens here, becoming almost river-like. Storage buildings and warehouses rise on either side, their mud brick walls thick and windowless, designed to keep contents cool. Ramps lead down to the water for loading boats. These would have been bustling spots by day, laborers shouting, boats bumping, overseers scribbling inventory on clay tablets. But now, the water laps quietly against the banks, and the warehouses loom like silent guardians. The moonlight catches a half-submerged reed boat tied to a post. Its woven surface gleams faintly, and you can smell the damp vegetable scent of reeds and mud. It's easy to imagine a lone boatman poling down this canal, the rhythmic sound of his pole tapping the canal bottom like a heartbeat. You pause on a wooden loading ramp. Beneath you, the water drifts onward, past the city, toward fields and villages that stretch beyond the horizon. The canal is both boundary and bridge, a man-made river connecting human lives across distance and time. It's one of those quiet achievements that rarely gets romanticized, but literally kept civilization alive. Before you leave the canal, you glance back toward the walls you visited earlier. From here, they seem distant but protective, wrapping the city like a shell. The canals, in contrast, reach outward, open, flowing, linking the city to the wider world. Walls keep things in, canals let things move. Together, they form a delicate balance between safety and exchange. Another small smile creeps in. Somewhere along these waters, a boatman probably told the same joke every night, and his passengers laughed politely every single time, because the trip would have felt wrong without it. Some things never change. As you follow the canal inland again, the street turns toward a cluster of larger structures ahead. The faint outline of monumental doorways and long, echoing halls emerges in the night. You're approaching the heart of spiritual architecture. Temples and ritual spaces where stone, brick, and belief blended seamlessly. The markets may sleep, the canals may whisper, but the temples, they wait. You follow the canal-side street until it bends inward toward the center of the city. The sounds of water fade behind you, replaced by a hush that feels almost deliberate, like the city itself is lowering its voice. Ahead, rising above the rooftops, are the silhouettes of temples and ritual spaces, their stepped roofs and long facades catching just enough moonlight to reveal their solemn geometry. Even at night, these places radiate presence. As you approach, the air grows stiller, as if the winds pause out of respect. The ground under your feet shifts from dusty street to smoother, more compacted earth, occasionally lined with baked bricks. Lantern niches dot the outer walls, empty now, but you can imagine the soft, flickering glow they would have cast during nighttime ceremonies. In ancient Mesopotamian cities, temples weren't just religious buildings, they were economic, administrative, and cultural hubs. If the canals were the veins, these were the heart. Mesopotamian temples, often called ziggurats when built in their stepped, tower-like form, were dedicated to specific deities and served as both houses of worship and centers of economic management. Each major city typically had a patron deity. In for example, it was Nana, the moon god. The temple complex wasn't just a single structure, but a collection of courtyards, shrines, storage rooms, kitchens, and sometimes schools. Priests and priestesses managed offerings, trade, and land. Temples owned farms, herds, and workshops. They were basically the divine version of corporate headquarters. You step through a narrow gate and into a wide courtyard. The open space seems to drink in the moonlight. Thick mud brick walls enclose it, and their surfaces are plastered smooth, giving the courtyard a clean, almost minimalistic feel. A few date palms rise from square planters, their fronds swaying faintly. The atmosphere is hushed, not eerie, just deeply still. Somewhere to your left, you notice a raised platform with a shallow basin carved into it, blackened slightly from ancient fires. This is where offerings would have been made: bread, beer, incense, maybe a few unlucky sheep. The smell would have been a mix of baked grain, sweet smoke, and animal musk. Right now, though, only faint traces linger in the cool night air. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Mesopotamian temples had what we might call kitchens attached to them, where offerings were prepared not only for the gods, but also for the temple staff and sometimes for redistribution to the poor. It wasn't entirely altruistic. Keeping the population fed also kept them loyal, but it gave temples an essential role in the daily rhythm of the city. Imagine priests debating over bread portions like ancient cafeteria managers. You move deeper into the complex, passing through a doorway flanked by slightly protruding buttresses. Inside, the space narrows into a long, rectangular hall, sometimes called a cella or holy of holies. The ceiling would have been low and dark, probably supported by wooden beams, with only a few oil lamps casting gentle, trembling light. At the far end, raised slightly above the floor, sits what would have been the cult statue of the temple's deity, carved, dressed, and treated as a living presence. Historians still argue whether worshippers ever actually saw these statues, or if access was restricted to priests. Some say common people could glimpse the divine image during special festivals. Others argue it remained cloaked and hidden, adding mystery to its power. Either way, standing here now, you can imagine the profound sense of awe that someone might have felt stepping into this dim, fragrant space thousands of years ago. You walk slowly down the center of the hall. Your footsteps are soft against the packed floor. The walls are decorated, not with bright frescoes like later Mediterranean temples, but with reliefs and painted bricks. Simple geometric patterns, perhaps stars or stylized reeds, and the occasional inscription in cuneiform, the world's first writing system. The writing here is less literary masterpiece and more official record of donations and decrees. Imagine someone chipping away at a clay tablet to record how many sheep got delivered this week. Accounting meets eternity.
One light joke drifts into your thoughts. Somewhere, some overworked scribe probably prayed not to the city's patron god, but to the god of, "Please don't make me copy another 200 tablets today." You reach the far end of the hall and pause. Even without the statue, the space has a weight to it. The air feels thick, almost like it's listening. You can picture a priest stepping forward in slow, deliberate movements, lighting incense, and murmuring prayers in Sumerian or Akkadian, languages whose sounds once echoed through these walls nightly. Outside, the city might bustle, but here, the rhythm slows to match the pulse of ritual. Moving on, you find a narrow staircase winding upward. Temples weren't always towering like the famous Ziggurat of but many had elevated sanctuaries or upper rooms that symbolized closeness to the heavens. You climb the worn steps. Each one is slightly uneven, shaped by countless feet over generations. When you emerge at the top, the view is breathtaking. From this elevated point, the entire city spreads around you. You can see the dark line of the wall, the gleaming canal you walked beside earlier, and the pale shapes of rooftops. And there, rising even higher nearby, is the ziggurat itself, that massive stepped structure dedicated to the city's god. Its silhouette is crisp against the stars. By day, priests would climb its ramps carrying offerings. By night, it seems to lean toward the sky. Another quirky fact, some temple rooftops were used for observing celestial movements. Priests, who doubled as early astronomers, recorded the positions of stars and planets from these high vantage points. Their observations weren't just scientific, they were deeply tied to rituals, agricultural cycles, and royal decisions. Imagine someone in a linen robe squinting at Venus through the night haze and muttering, looks like the king's got some bad luck coming. Historians still debate how widespread these celestial practices were. Some argued they were reserved for major temple complexes like Babylon, while others suggest even smaller cities participated in some form of skywatching. What's certain is that Mesopotamian temples were not isolated religious spaces. They were living institutions woven into the fabric of governance, economy, and cosmic interpretation. Descending the staircase, you pass through a side courtyard where you find a series of small rooms. These were likely storerooms, classrooms, and administrative spaces. The temple staff wasn't just a few priests chanting all day. There were accountants, scribes, cooks, gatekeepers, and likely apprentices running errands. Temples ran like complex bureaucracies, complete with rules, ledgers, and probably the occasional inter-office drama over missing barley rations. You step through another gate, and suddenly you're outside the temple complex again, in a wide open plaza. In the daytime, this would have been crowded during festivals. People bringing offerings, musicians playing lyres and drums, dancers performing in honor of the gods. Sometimes, statues of deities were carried through the streets in grand processions, accompanied by chanting crowds. Right now, though, the plaza is empty, except for the whisper of wind. Standing in this space at night gives you a sense of scale, not just physical but emotional. Temples anchored the city. Their architecture shaped not just movement but belief. Walls channeled crowds, courtyards encouraged gatherings, narrow halls guided focus. Even the way the moonlight falls on the temple facade seems purposeful, as if the building itself participates in the ritual. A gentle smile forms as you imagine some temple janitor thousands of years ago, sweeping the courtyard after a festival, muttering about people never picking up after themselves. Sacred or not, someone had to clean. As you leave the temple complex, the atmosphere shifts again. The air warms slightly, and you hear faint echoes of your footsteps bouncing between walls. Ahead lies a different kind of architectural grandeur, not sacred this time, but political. Palaces, power,
decorative glazed bricks and throne rooms that once intimidated emissaries. The gods had their houses, and so did kings. You follow the plaza's edge until the temple walls give way to a broader avenue. The quiet reverence of the sacred precinct slowly fades into something grander, heavier, more performative. The street widens, the walls on either side rise taller, and faint moonlight glints off surfaces that are not just plain mud brick, but remarkably glazed and decorated. You're approaching the royal palaces, where architecture stops whispering and starts making statements. The air itself seems different here. The breeze flows less freely, trapped between thick walls and monumental facades. Your footsteps sound smaller against a wide avenue, as though the street was designed to remind you exactly who's in charge. And, in a way, it was. Mesopotamian palaces were both administrative centers and royal residences, often covering vast areas and built adjacent to temples or within fortified compounds. They were places where kings received emissaries, managed the affairs of their city-state, stored tribute, and, let's be honest, show it off. The palaces of later periods, like those of the Neo-Assyrian kings at Nineveh and Nimrod, were famous for their size, complexity, and elaborate decorations. Even earlier palaces in Sumer and Akkad, while less flamboyant, were still impressive structures meant to project authority. You turn a corner, and there it is, a palace gate. Two massive doorways, their wooden beams long gone, but their baked brick frames still standing, loom above you. The entrance is flanked by square towers, their surfaces once covered with brilliantly colored glazed bricks, deep blues, bright yellows, and warm reds. Time has worn them down, but here and there you catch glimmers of color in the moonlight, like faint memories clinging to the walls. You pass through the gates and the space opens into a grand courtyard. It's vast and geometrically precise, the ground paved in baked bricks, some of which are inscribed with the king's name, an ancient version of "Property of His Majesty, don't steal." At the far end, wide stairways lead to a raised platform and the inner halls. Standing here, you get the sense that this courtyard was designed to choreograph human movement. Ambassadors approaching slowly, guards stationed symmetrically, servants bustling in practiced paths. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some palace walls were decorated not only with reliefs of kings and gods, but also with scenes of banquet preparations, exotic animals, and even humorous images. In one Assyrian relief, a servant carries a table piled so high with food that his face is hidden behind it, proof that royal feasts were as extra as you'd imagine. Historians still argue whether these palaces were designed more for practical governance or for psychological theater. Some scholars emphasize the bureaucratic functions, the archives, reception halls, and storage rooms. Others see them primarily as stage sets for royal rituals, where architecture amplified the king's aura. Both perspectives likely hold truth. The palace was a place to run a kingdom and a place to make everyone feel how big that kingdom was. You move deeper into the palace, crossing the courtyard toward a wide entrance hall. The walls here are unusually thick, designed to keep the interior cool in the sweltering summers. As you step inside, your footsteps echo softly. The ceiling would have been supported by wooden beams, possibly cedar imported from faraway mountains, a luxury that spoke of wealth and reach. The first hall is vast. Its walls once displayed carved stone panels or painted brick reliefs depicting royal achievements, conquests, hunts, divine blessings. In later Assyrian palaces, entire corridors were lined with scenes of lions being hunted by kings, archers firing in formation, and spirits with eagle heads blessing doorways. In earlier Sumerian and Babylonian contexts, decorations were simpler, but still conveyed power. Geometric patterns, inscriptions of royal titles, and protective figures set into niches. One light joke drifts into your thoughts.
Imagine being a messenger from a tiny neighboring village, stepping into this hall and seeing a 10-foot-tall relief of the king trampling enemies. You'd probably deliver your message very politely and then back out slowly. You follow the hallway into a throne room, or at least what remains of it. The floor is still paved with carefully set bricks. The walls are thick, almost fortress-like, but their inner surfaces show traces of painted plaster and embedded ornamental cones arranged in intricate patterns. At the far end, a raised platform marks where the king's throne would have stood. Wooden, possibly inlaid with gold or lapis lazuli, flanked by attendants holding fans. Standing here at night with no crowds, no royal court, you can almost hear the murmurs of ancient diplomacy. Emissaries shuffling nervously, scribes scratching on clay tablets, guards standing rigid with spears. A place like this wasn't designed to be cozy. It was designed to impress. Another quirky fact, some palace complexes included audience gardens or courtyards planted with imported trees and watered by canals-fed irrigation systems. Kings like Sennacherib were famous for creating lush, artificial gardens within palace walls, a kind of ancient showpiece landscaping. Babylon's legendary hanging gardens, though debated, may have been part of such royal displays, blending architecture, engineering, and horticulture to dazzle visitors. Historians still debate whether these gardens actually existed in Babylon or were located in Nineveh, described by Greek writers who might have mixed up their cities. Some think they were real feats of hydraulic engineering. Others believe they were literary exaggerations. Either way, the idea of kings using water, plants, and terraces to craft architectural theater is firmly rooted in Mesopotamian royal tradition. As you move through the palace, you pass narrower corridors leading to private quarters, storage rooms, and administrative offices. Not everything here was grandiose. Somewhere, accountants kept endless records of grain, textiles, and taxes. Clay tablets stacked in storerooms contained inventories that would make modern spreadsheets look tame. You picture a scribe hunched over his tablet, stylus in hand, muttering, "If one more shipment of dates goes missing, I swear I'll start writing curses on these receipts." Bureaucracy has always had its champions and its sufferers. You turn into a side courtyard, smaller than the main one, but carefully proportioned. The walls here are smoother, more refined. A faint breeze moves through, carrying with it a hint of ancient cooking smells. Palaces had kitchens too, after all. Royal banquets were legendary, with roasted meats, breads, fruits, beer, and wine flowing in abundance. These feasts weren't just indulgence, they were political theater, binding allies and intimidating rivals. The palace's outer walls tell another story. While their inner facades were decorated to impress, the outer ones were often reinforced, merging seamlessly with the city's defensive walls. In some cities, the palace was almost a fortress within a fortress, with towers and gates that could withstand sieges. The dual role of palace as both home and stronghold shaped how rooms were arranged. Public spaces near the entrances, private spaces buried deep inside. You exit through a narrow gate at the back of the palace compound, and the air changes once again. The Grand Avenue gives way to quieter streets, less symmetrical, more organic. The walls here are shorter, simpler. You've stepped from the realm of kings into the world of ordinary people. The contrast is striking. Palaces dominate the skyline. Homes nestle against each other like neighbors sharing stories. Before you leave the palace behind, you glance back. Even under moonlight, its bulk is undeniable. It doesn't just occupy space, it controls perspective. Streets lead toward it, walls frame it, plazas expand before it. It's architecture as power, not just to house a ruler, but to shape how people move, look, and feel. One last light joke before you go. Somewhere deep inside, there was probably a servant tripping over a priceless vase and whispering, Please don't let the king notice. Royal life might have been majestic, but it was still filled with very human moments. You turn toward the residential quarters ahead. The streets narrow, and the mood shifts. Gone are the glazed facades and towering reliefs. Here, architecture becomes intimate. Courtyards, kitchens, and sleeping spaces. The humble homes that gave life to the city's heartbeat. The streets narrow further as you leave the shadow of the palace behind. The night air grows quieter, the cobblestones uneven beneath your feet. Moonlight brushes against low mud brick walls, casting soft, lopsided shadows across alleyways. You're now in the residential heart of the city, a maze of homes, courtyards, and workshops where ordinary Mesopotamians lived their everyday lives. It feels different here. The echo of your footsteps is absorbed by the soft walls. The air is warmer, closer, carrying the faint scent of baked bread, clay dust, and perhaps a lingering whiff of goats. This is not a city of monumental spaces and grand facades. It's a city of rhythm, where daily routines have shaped architecture over centuries. Typical Mesopotamian houses were made from sun-dried mud bricks, often built around a central courtyard, with rooms arranged inward to keep out heat and noise. They were generally 2 stories tall, with flat roofs that sometimes doubled as sleeping spaces during hot summer nights. Privacy was highly valued. Most houses had blank exterior walls with very few windows, and entrances led directly into modest reception rooms. You pause at a doorway. Not a grand arch, just a narrow wooden frame tucked into a plain wall. If you were a guest, you'd be welcomed here and led into the courtyard, the beating heart of the home. Imagine stepping inside. The courtyard is rectangular, paved with brick, and open to the night sky. Clay lamps glow faintly along the walls. This open space regulates temperature, collects rainwater, and provides light for the surrounding rooms. Archaeologists have found that some houses had built-in drains under courtyards leading to street channels, making Mesopotamian homes surprisingly well adapted to urban sanitation for their time. While not exactly modern plumbing, these early systems helped keep living spaces relatively clean in crowded neighborhoods. Historians still argue whether these drains were part of a coordinated municipal system or simply household improvisations connected to open sewers. Some believe cities had planned networks beneath streets. Others think families simply poked holes in their walls and hoped their waste flowed downhill. Either way, you can imagine a few messy experiments that probably didn't go as planned. You walk deeper through the residential lane. The houses are packed tightly, sharing walls like bricks in a puzzle. Streets twist unpredictably, not in grand grids, but in organic flows, shaped by centuries of rebuilding. Some walls jut out unevenly, a sign that someone's great-grandfather decided to expand a kitchen without asking the city planner. There were no neat zoning laws here, just a slow dance between neighbors, materials, and necessity. As you pass one doorway, you catch the sound of quiet laughter from within. It's easy to imagine the scene. A family gathered in the courtyard after sunset, escaping the day's heat. A mother kneading dough, a father repairing a tool, children chasing each other in circles. These courtyards were private yet communal, spaces of work and relaxation in equal measure. You duck under a low arch and step into a narrow lane, barely wide enough for 2 donkeys to pass. The walls close in on both sides. Above, wooden beams stretch between rooftops, sometimes supporting makeshift upper rooms or providing shade for pedestrians below. These shaded lanes were a relief during hot afternoons, but at night they become silent tunnels where every sound carries. Here's a second mainstream fact to anchor the picture. Flat roofs were common features of Mesopotamian homes, often used for drying crops, storing goods, or even sleeping. On especially hot nights, families would haul mats and bedding upstairs and sleep under the stars. There's a certain beauty in that. No air conditioners, no fans, just the cool desert breeze drifting over mud brick walls.
And the light joke naturally slips in. Of course, the occasional neighborhood rooster would probably ruin the peace around 4 a.m. Some things never change.
You climb a short mud brick stair to one of these rooftops, imagining yourself not as a visitor, but as someone who belongs here. The city spreads out below in layers of silence. Temple towers in the distance, palace walls hulking like sleeping beasts, and thousands of rooftops blending together like a textured quilt. Up here, architecture becomes landscape. Flat roofs knit the urban fabric together. People could even walk from house to house this way, hopping between buildings like ancient urban ninjas. Some houses had little ventilation chimneys or narrow shafts built into walls to circulate air, an ingenious early cooling method. These tiny vertical spaces allowed hot air to escape upward, making rooms below more bearable during scorching summers. It's not air conditioning, but it's clever. Historians still argue whether these architectural features were standardized innovations or ad hoc experiments by skilled builders. Some think professional architects designed homes according to common blueprints. Others argue most houses were built by families themselves, with local masons lending expertise when needed. The truth likely varies city by city, century by century. You descend from the rooftop and follow a lane that opens into a small neighborhood square. Not a monumental plaza, but a practical one. A well sits at the center, surrounded by a low curb. A few clay jars are stacked nearby, evidence of shared water use. Around the square are bakeries, potters' workshops, and small shrines tucked into corners. This square hums quietly even at night. You can picture daytime here: women gathering water, children playing, craftsmen displaying wares, neighbors exchanging gossip. Architecture shapes community life, and these microspaces were where urban identity was forged. Not in palaces, not in temples, but here, between the well and the oven. Many houses had small dome-shaped clay ovens called tanurs, used for baking bread, a staple of Mesopotamian diet. The smell of fresh bread would waft through these streets daily, mingling with the smoke of cooking fires. Imagine walking through this neighborhood at dawn. The scent alone would make your stomach grumble. Historians still debate how strictly neighborhoods were divided by profession or social class. Some argue that potters, bakers, and scribes clustered in specialized quarters. Others think the layout was more mixed, with workshops and homes interwoven organically. Excavations show both patterns in different cities, suggesting a flexible urban structure rather than rigid segregation. As you walk, your eyes trace the decorations on house exteriors, or rather, the lack of them. Unlike temples and palaces, residential walls are mostly bare. Mud brick surfaces are sometimes plastered and whitewashed for brightness, but they're rarely adorned. Beauty is hidden inside, in courtyard layouts, in carefully arranged rooms, in household altars. It's architecture that prioritizes function and family over spectacle. And here's a light joke that fits perfectly. If a Mesopotamian teenager wanted to show off their house to a friend, they'd probably have to say, "Trust me, it looks way better inside." You pass by a doorway with a small niche above it, a household shrine to protective deities. Many homes included these niches or miniature altars. Clay figurines of household gods, ancestors, or protective spirits stood guard, keeping evil influences at bay. Some were elaborately modeled, others were just simple lumps of clay with etched eyes. A quirky tidbit: some archaeologists have found tiny clay model houses buried under thresholds, possibly as ritual offerings to ensure stability and safety. Imagine building a mini version of your house and tucking it under the door like a good luck charm. Ancient homeowners were not taking chances. Historians still argue whether these household rituals were standardized religious practices or personal, improvised traditions passed down through families. Some see them as extensions of temple cults. Others view them as a more intimate, domestic spirituality. The debate continues, but standing here, you can sense the care that went into making homes feel safe.
You turn another corner, and the street becomes even quieter. The palace is now distant. The temple towers faint silhouettes against the stars. What surrounds you is humble yet intricate. An urban ecosystem of homes, workshops, wells, and shared spaces, all built from the same mud brick, reshaped generation after generation. Mesopotamian residential architecture may lack the dramatic flair of ziggurats or palace reliefs, but it's here, in these modest walls, that life truly unfolded. Families grew, stories were told, bread baked, prayers whispered, deals struck. The architectural wonders of temples and palaces were impressive, but these homes sustained the civilization. You linger a little longer, feeling the texture of a wall beneath your fingers. It's cool, slightly rough, holding centuries of human touch. Then, gently, you continue walking toward the city's edge, where homes thin out and farmland begins to appear beyond the walls. The residential maze begins to loosen, giving way to open spaces, canals, and the dark outline of the countryside. You follow the winding residential lanes until the city gradually thins, and the soft hum of human activity fades into the gentle murmur of the outskirts and farmlands. The walls of houses are lower here, the streets wider but less defined, and the air carries the earthy scent of tilled soil, canal water, and reeds swaying in the night breeze. You can hear the occasional splash as a fish or frog disturbs the surface of a small irrigation ditch. This is the transitional space between the tightly packed urban core and the sprawling agricultural hinterlands that sustain the city. Mesopotamian cities relied heavily on surrounding farmland for their food supply, using complex irrigation systems to divert water from rivers and canals to fields. Crops like barley, wheat, flax, and vegetables thrived here, and irrigation was essential to maintain productivity in the semi-arid environment. Seasonal flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates brought fertile silt, replenishing the soil, but also demanding careful engineering to prevent destruction. You walk along a narrow dirt path that skirts a small canal. The water reflects moonlight like liquid silver, tracing the edges of rectangular plots of farmland. In daylight, these plots would be bustling with laborers and draft animals. At night, they rest quietly, as though taking a deep breath in preparation for the next day. You notice the subtle embankments along the canal, designed to keep the water flowing efficiently to every furrow. Some farmers decorated their irrigation dikes with small clay figurines or tokens believed to protect the land from pests or divine displeasure. Perhaps it was superstition, perhaps ritual, or maybe it was just a clever way to remind themselves which dike they had last tended. Either way, it adds personality to an otherwise utilitarian landscape. Historians still argue whether the large-scale irrigation projects were mostly coordinated by temple authorities, city administrations, or local communities. Archaeological records show evidence of both centralized management and localized informal efforts, suggesting a dynamic mix of planning and improvisation. As you continue, you pass a simple thatched shelter near the canal. It is likely a field house used by farmers who worked long hours in the surrounding plots. These structures are humble, mud brick bases with reed or straw roofs, small openings for light and ventilation. Inside, simple clay jars and woven mats indicate that someone may sleep here seasonally, tending the crops or guarding grain stores. You lean over the canal's edge and peer at the water, imagining a barge gliding quietly through the fields in daylight. Even the smallest canals were navigable for lightweight reed boats, allowing farmers to transport produce without trekking miles over dusty roads. It's a slow, deliberate system, but highly effective. One light joke drifts through your mind. The field watchman probably had a pet goat who took more naps than he did, and nobody ever had the heart to chase it away. Some things are timeless. Walking further, you notice raised earthen platforms at regular intervals. These may have served as lookout posts, storage mounds, or small shrines. They are modest compared to the city's ziggurats,
yet they have their own quiet dignity. Many were topped with small altars where offerings of bread or beer were made to ensure the fertility of the soil. A second quirky fact, some farmers embedded small cuneiform tablets into the edges of canals, recording land ownership or water rights. These clay markers were durable, marking property and responsibilities in a way that lasted far longer than any wooden signpost ever could. Imagine stepping over a tablet, knowing your ancestors once argued about irrigation rights at the same spot. Historians still debate whether these markers were primarily legal instruments or ritual objects. Some suggest that water management and religious observance were inseparable in Mesopotamia, meaning that the act of marking land had both practical and spiritual significance. Either way, it underscores how integrated human life and landscape were. You move along a slightly elevated embankment that overlooks the fields. The furrows form a rhythmic pattern under the moonlight, like a patchwork quilt stitched by careful hands. Barley waves faintly in the night breeze, and you can almost hear the soft rustle of grain stalks rubbing together. Irrigation ditches reflect stars, doubling the sky in a liquid mirror. This is a quiet choreography of human ingenuity and natural forces, unfolding every night without ceremony, without drama, yet utterly essential. As you walk, you pass a cluster of small huts, likely belonging to tenant farmers or laborers. Mud brick walls are cracked but intact, suggesting continuous use over years. Roofs are low, sometimes partially caved in, but inside, traces of hearths, pottery shards, and simple sleeping mats hint at daily routines. These homes are modest, but they are life-sustaining. Without them, the city you walked through earlier would collapse within weeks. Another small joke enters your thoughts. Somewhere, a farmer probably muttered to himself after an early morning flood, "Well, at least the barley got a bath." Even in ancient Mesopotamia, humor was a coping mechanism. You follow the irrigation canals as they branch further outward, connecting distant fields to the city. The engineering here is impressive. Sluices, small dams, and carefully angled ditches ensure that water flows evenly. Some canals are lined with mud brick or stone to prevent erosion. Others are left natural, shaped over decades of trial and error. Even under the quiet night, you can sense the careful thought and labor that went into designing these lifelines. In some areas, farmers planted reeds along canal edges to prevent erosion and filter sediment. These early bioengineering techniques reveal a surprising understanding of ecology. The canals were not just conduits for water, they were living systems that required maintenance, observation, and innovation. Historians still debate how centrally controlled irrigation really was. Royal inscriptions boast about kings constructing massive canals, yet archaeological evidence suggests a significant portion of water management was handled by local communities and temple authorities, blending top-down and grassroots approaches. You step onto a narrow footbridge over one of the canals. Below, water glimmers faintly, reflecting reeds and a few stars. The bridge is simple, just mud brick and wooden planks, yet it is functional and enduring. Imagine a farmer with a basket of barley crossing here every morning, balancing along the narrow edge while planning his day. Beyond the bridge, the landscape begins to open further. Fields stretch in orderly rectangles, dotted with small trees, raised platforms, and occasional huts. The faint outlines of distant canals trace intricate patterns across the darkened land. It's a vast, quiet expanse, a reminder that Mesopotamian civilization depended on careful management of both urban and rural spaces. The night deepens. You pause for a moment, taking in the rhythmic patterns of fields, the soft gurgle of water in canals, and the distant outline of the city's walls. The contrast between urban complexity and rural simplicity is striking. One keeps the population secure, fed, and organized. The other sustains life itself, providing food, fiber, and trade goods. Another lighthearted thought surfaces.
Somewhere along these canals, a farmer probably tried to train a donkey to fetch water and failed spectacularly. Some challenges transcend time. As you continue along the embankment, you notice how farm layouts subtly mirror city planning. Rectangular plots, straight ditches, small squares for tools or storage. It's as if the principles that shaped urban streets and courtyards extend naturally into rural spaces, reflecting a civilization that valued order, efficiency, and quiet elegance. Eventually, you reach the outermost edge of the cultivated land. Beyond, the terrain slopes toward the open riverbanks, and you can hear the faint ripple of the Tigris or Euphrates. Here, the city's influence gives way entirely to the natural world: reeds, mudflats, occasional wildlife. Yet even this boundary is shaped by human hands, the result of centuries of observation, labor, and careful design. Standing here, under the cool night sky, you realize that Mesopotamian architecture is not just stone and brick. It's canals, courtyards, walls, terraces, and embankments working together to sustain life. The city depends on the fields, and the fields depend on the water, and the water depends on human ingenuity. All of it intertwined in silent harmony under the stars. You take one last slow walk along the embankment, letting your fingers brush the mud brick retaining walls. The patterns of the furrows and canals below catch the moonlight, creating a quiet rhythm in your mind. The city may sleep, the palace may rest, the temples may pause, but the land continues its slow, deliberate work, holding civilization together one irrigation ditch at a time. You leave the quiet fields behind and begin to wander toward the industrial outskirts of the city, where craftsmanship and production defined another layer of Mesopotamian life. The transition is subtle. Streets widen slightly, courtyards become shared workspaces, and the scent of clay, bitumen, and smoldering fires drifts through the night air. The hum of activity is absent now, but the remnants of human labor are everywhere. Tools neatly stacked, kilns cooled to blackened stone, and walls pockmarked with years of soot and handling. Mesopotamian cities were hubs of specialized crafts, including pottery, metalwork, weaving, and brickmaking. These industries were essential not only for domestic use, but also for trade, taxation, and religious offerings. Specialized neighborhoods sometimes formed around workshops, creating early proto-industrial districts. Some workshops were tied to temples, supplying goods for rituals and trade, while others were private enterprises, thriving under the city's growing economy. You pass a long, low building with walls darkened by soot. Inside, a kiln sits cool but ready for the next firing. Imagine the heat that would have emanated here during the day. Metal workers hammering bronze, potters shaping clay, apprentices scrambling to avoid burns. The architecture is functional. Thick walls retain heat for firing, while open courtyards provide ventilation and room for storage. Some Mesopotamian potters carved tiny messages or doodles into the bases of jars, perhaps as signatures, jokes, or personal marks. You can almost imagine someone centuries ago whispering to a colleague, "If anyone finds this, tell them I was the master of the left-handed swirl." It's a quiet, almost playful trace of individuality embedded in otherwise utilitarian objects. Historians still argue about the scale of these workshops. Were they tightly controlled by temple authorities and local rulers, or did small, independent artisans thrive with relative freedom? Evidence exists for both: large-scale, state-supported production alongside small, family-run workshops. Either way, the result was a bustling, industrious landscape that powered the city's economy and daily life. You continue along a narrow lane lined with brickmakers' yards, stacks of sun-dried mud bricks piled high like miniature stepped ziggurats themselves. The bricks are uniform, the result of careful molds and meticulous drying. Some are inscribed with the names of kings or officials, a sort of quality stamp from the state. Others bear marks of individual workshops, a testament to craftsmanship and pride. Walking through, you can almost hear the faint clink of tools shaping clay, the dull thud of molds being pressed, and the soft patter of mud being shoveled into forms. By day, the courtyards would be filled with laborers, carrying bricks to the city for temples, palaces, homes, and fortifications. By night, the air is still, carrying the latent warmth of afternoon work. In some workshops, apprentices slept in the same courtyards where they worked, keeping an eye on materials and ready to resume at dawn. Living and working in the same space blurred the lines between labor, learning, and daily life. It's an intimate kind of urban planning where architecture supports both efficiency and community. Historians still debate whether labor was primarily voluntary or coerced, particularly in state-run projects. Some suggest workers were conscripted for certain tasks, like temple brick production, while others argue many artisans chose these trades for income, prestige, or social ties. Regardless, the city's architectural achievements depended on these networks of skilled hands. You turn into a weaving district, where long, low buildings house looms and dye vats. The faint smell of wet flax mingles with that of indigo and saffron used for textiles. You can imagine fingers dancing across threads, creating fabric for clothing, trade, and ritual offerings. Courtyards provide space to stretch threads in the sun, while small rooms protect delicate fibers from dust and moisture. A mainstream fact here, textile production was a major economic driver in Mesopotamia, with wool and flax being primary fibers. Women were often deeply involved in spinning and weaving, both at home and in dedicated workshops. The resulting fabrics were used locally and exported, sometimes dyed with vibrant colors that required considerable technical knowledge. Light humor drifts into your thoughts. A young apprentice probably once dyed his sleeve blue, looked down, and realized he'd created a fashion disaster centuries ahead of its time. Some things never change. Nearby, metalworking yards line the street. Bronze and copper tools gleam faintly in the moonlight, stored carefully in mud brick sheds. Forges are cold now, but during the day, sparks would fly. Hammers would strike anvils, and the air would shimmer with heat. Metalworkers shaped everything from agricultural tools to weapons to ceremonial items. Their architecture is practical. Thick walls to contain heat, open courtyards for ventilation, and raised platforms for storage. Some metalworkers use tiny clay molds to craft miniature figurines likely for ritual or decorative purposes. One can imagine a smith chuckling at a tiny warrior figurine and thinking, "At least this one won't argue back." Historians still debate the degree of specialization. Were artisans generalists capable of multiple crafts, or did guild-like expertise exist? Archaeological evidence shows both approaches. Some workshops combine pottery and metalwork, others are highly specialized. You wander further into food production areas where ovens, storage rooms, and breweries cluster. Large clay vats, once filled with beer or oil, sit empty now, but you can imagine them brimming with frothy barley beer for workers, temples, and festivals. Courtyards here are utilitarian, designed for transport, storage, and processing. Another mainstream fact: beer was a staple in the Mesopotamian diet, used for sustenance, payments, and offerings. Brewing was a sophisticated craft, often tied to temple economies, with precise techniques and rituals. This wasn't just a casual drink, it was integral to daily life. The brewer probably muttered, "If I have to explain one more time why beer is essential for civilization, I'm writing it on a tablet." Some priorities never change. You pause at a small bridge over a narrow canal cutting through this industrial zone. Water is low, reflecting moonlight faintly. These canals not only irrigate fields, but also supply workshops with the essential water needed for pottery, dyeing, and brewing. The canals themselves are modest yet crucial, a reminder of how infrastructure underpins craftsmanship and industry. As you follow the canal, you notice small storage mounds near kiln yards. They contain clay, reeds, grain, or finished goods awaiting transport. Courtyards are carefully organized, each functional area serving its purpose with minimal ornamentation. The rhythm is consistent, almost meditative. Production, storage, transport, rest. You stop for a moment and take it all in. From the humble kilns to weaving rooms, from the metalworking sheds to brewing vats, the architecture of labor surrounds you. Walls, roofs, courtyards, and streets are designed to maximize efficiency, safety, and flow. Each space is a quiet testament to human ingenuity, even if it rarely makes it into epic poems or grand reliefs. One last quirky thought drifts across your mind. Somewhere, a tired apprentice might have placed a tiny clay sheep on a work table just to make the day more entertaining. Some traditions of play and subtle rebellion are universal. As you leave the industrial district, the air grows quieter. You pass storage yards and courtyards now empty, stepping back toward the residential lanes that eventually lead to the city's outer edges. The city's life pulse slows, yet its architecture, from monumental temples to modest workshops, still speaks clearly of the civilization that shaped it. You leave the industrial district behind, stepping onto a quieter lane where merchants and traders once carried their wares. The night is calm now, but you can almost hear the faint echoes of bustling bazaars, the clatter of pottery, the creak of wooden carts, the muted bargaining of customers haggling over dates, grain, and textiles. These streets are narrower than the industrial avenues, but more irregular, reflecting centuries of growth, adaptation, and trade-driven improvisation. Marketplaces were central to Mesopotamian urban life, functioning as spaces for economic exchange, social interaction, and civic communication. Goods ranged from local produce like barley and flax to imported luxuries such as timber, metals, and semi-precious stones. Market areas often developed near city gates for easy access by caravans and riverboats, and their organization reflected the city's priorities: efficiency, security, and visibility. You pass a small square where merchants would have displayed their goods on low mud brick platforms. Clay jars, woven baskets, and textiles are imagined laid out with meticulous care, each merchant hoping to catch a buyer's attention. The architecture here is functional yet intentional. Open-air squares for visibility, narrow lanes to channel foot traffic, small covered stalls for shelter, and occasional wells for water. Some marketplaces had embedded public complaint tablets or small shrines where buyers could leave clay notes if they felt cheated. It's a little like Yelp, but in baked clay. Imagine a customer muttering, "This barley is too soft," and pressing a tiny tablet into a niche for posterity. Historians still debate how regulated these markets were. Some scholars argue that temple authorities and city officials tightly controlled trade and prices, while others suggest a more laissez-faire approach with informal networks of merchants and local enforcement. Archaeological evidence supports both views, hinting at a dynamic interplay of oversight and improvisation. You walk further down the lane, passing small workshops interspersed with modest merchant homes. Here, shopkeepers lived above or beside their stalls, an efficient fusion of commerce and domestic life. Courtyards served as both family spaces and functional areas for storing goods, drying fish or grains, or mending baskets and ropes. The architecture fosters intimacy, blending home and work while maintaining boundaries between private and public life. You notice the faint remains of raised platforms or shallow steps in front of some doorways. These were likely display areas for goods, allowing merchants to elevate wares above the dusty street and create a subtle sense of prestige. Even in the absence of modern signage, architecture dictated attention and encouraged commerce. A second quirky fact, archaeologists have found tiny clay figurines hidden in merchant stalls, possibly as good luck charms for prosperous sales or protection against theft. Picture a small lion figurine perched on a shelf, silently guarding the day's earnings while the merchant negotiates with customers.
You pass a narrow canal that cuts through this sector of the city. Some merchants used it to transport goods directly into the heart of the city. Lightweight reed boats carried baskets of dates, jars of oil, and clay tablets from rural producers, delivering them to shops and warehouses. The architecture of streets and canals was deeply intertwined. Commerce depended on both pathways and waterways. Historians still argue about the scale of river transport. Did the majority of goods move via small local boats, or were larger barges regularly employed? Evidence shows both practices, suggesting a flexible, adaptive system capable of adjusting to season, volume, and distance.
Continuing along the street, you pass what might have been a small weaving or dyeing corner attached to a merchant's home. Faint traces of colored residue on the walls hint at vibrant textiles once hung here to dry. Courtyards double as functional workspaces, and small ovens or hearths in corner rooms provide warmth for delicate tasks during colder months. These architectural arrangements maximize efficiency, combining storage, work, and display in minimal space. You enter a slightly larger square, where you imagine multiple merchants gathered during the day. This is likely a more permanent market area, with stalls made from baked bricks, reed mats, and wooden frames. The open area encourages comparison shopping, socializing, and information exchange. You almost hear the soft chatter of buyers comparing prices, the tapping of a scribe recording sales, and the occasional laughter or playful quarrel. Another light joke drifts into your thoughts. Some customer probably said, "If this fish doesn't taste right, I'll report it to the god of commerce." You imagine the clay tablets accumulating quietly over centuries, preserving minor grievances as if the gods themselves were overseeing fairness. You wander down a side lane lined with small inns and guest houses, catering to traveling merchants or pilgrims coming to the city. Rooms are compact but functional, mud brick walls, flat roofs, and simple courtyards for rest. These structures reinforce a simple principle: hospitality meets practicality. Some even had small wells or storage spaces for grain, beer, and water, ensuring guests could sustain themselves during brief stays. Some inns included miniature clay depictions of gods or protective spirits near doorways, perhaps to ward off theft, bad luck, or sleepless nights. Travelers might have slept with a faint sense of divine oversight, a small comfort in the bustling city. Historians still debate whether inns were predominantly private enterprises or tightly regulated by authorities. Temple and palace records indicate some involvement in lodging, suggesting that hosting travelers had both economic and civic importance. Either way, these spaces were vital nodes in the urban network, blending domesticity, commerce, and social interaction. You pause at a corner where the street meets a slightly wider avenue. In the faint moonlight, you notice the subtle rhythm of warehouses and storage facilities. These structures are simple yet effective. Thick mud brick walls, narrow entrances, and small windows placed high to protect goods from theft and weather. Clay jars, baskets, and bundles of textiles would have been stacked neatly inside, waiting for distribution to local shops or transport to other cities. Urban storage and distribution were critical for food security, trade, and taxation in Mesopotamian cities. Grain, oil, and beer were stored in silos or jars, often under administrative oversight. Temples, palaces, and merchant families maintained inventories, balancing supply with seasonal needs and festival demands. Another lighthearted thought arises. A warehouse manager probably sighed every harvest season, muttering, "If one more clay jar falls, I'll start writing complaints directly on the bricks." The challenges of ancient logistics clearly weren't much different from modern frustrations. Walking further, the avenue bends slightly, and you notice smaller side alleys leading into quiet residential pockets. The marketplace feels behind you now, replaced by domestic architecture, workshops, and canals. Yet, the faint hum of trade lingers in the imagination. The rhythm of coins exchanged, goods counted, and stories shared reverberates in the stillness of night. Standing here, you sense that Mesopotamian marketplaces were more than economic spaces. They were social and civic arenas, where architecture structured interactions, encouraged visibility, and facilitated connection between people. Streets, squares, and courtyards blended into a complex urban tapestry, seamlessly linking residential, industrial, and religious areas into a coherent, living city. You take one last glance at the wider avenue. Though quiet now, the layout of the streets, the placement of courtyards, the alignment of shops, and the network of canals all speak to careful planning and accumulated wisdom. The city is alive, even in its stillness, telling stories through its architecture of what it valued, how it functioned, and how people, ordinary and extraordinary alike, navigated their daily lives. You leave the marketplace behind and approach the religious districts that interweave quietly among the residential and commercial areas. Even in the still of night, these precincts exude a subtle presence, their mud-brick walls and stepped platforms hinting at spiritual authority. The streets narrow here, courtyards are more enclosed, and the air carries a faint earthy scent mixed with incense. Though the fires are long extinguished, the memory lingers. Mesopotamian temples, or ziggurats, were the center of religious, economic, and sometimes political life in the city. The structures were typically built on raised platforms, with mud brick cores faced with baked bricks, and served as the home of the city's patron deity. Temples were not only sacred spaces, but also storage and administrative centers, managing offerings, grain, and land holdings connected to the cult. You walk along a narrow lane leading to a smaller shrine, nestled between residential homes. Unlike the massive ziggurats, these shrines are modest, single courtyards, a small sanctuary room, and low walls. Yet they exude a sense of intimacy. Candlelight, clay oil lamps, and miniature altars would have created a quiet, sacred glow during ceremonies. The architecture emphasizes accessibility and personal devotion rather than grandeur. Some shrines contained small votive figurines of worshippers or animals, placed as offerings to gods in hopes of protection, fertility, or good fortune. You can imagine a child carefully leaving a tiny clay sheep, whispering prayers in a soft voice, unaware that this small act would resonate centuries later. Historians still argue whether these domestic shrines were primarily religious expressions or social markers of status. Were they personal and devotional, or more about showing compliance with civic and religious expectations? Evidence exists for both interpretations, suggesting a nuanced intersection of faith, identity, and community. As you move further, you approach the larger temple complexes, their presence more imposing even at night. You notice the thick mud brick walls, carefully aligned staircases, and terraces rising in stepped layers. In daylight, priests and attendants would have moved along these platforms, carrying offerings, performing rituals, and overseeing temple-dependent activities. The architecture is monumental, but its design also accommodates practical concerns: drainage for seasonal rains, storage spaces for grain and oils, and interior chambers for ceremonies. Some temples featured hidden niches or small storage alcoves, possibly for ritual objects, sacred texts, or even protective charms. Archaeologists have found tiny figurines tucked into walls, evidence of small, intimate acts of devotion. Imagine a priest slipping a token into the brickwork while muttering, "No one else needs to know about this," centuries before anyone would excavate it. Walking through the temple courtyards, you see the remnants of ceremonial architecture: raised platforms, long paved walkways, and what may have been garden terraces. Some temples incorporated carefully irrigated gardens or ornamental trees, combining sacred and natural beauty. These outdoor spaces were places for reflection, instruction, and sometimes administrative activity, blurring the line between public, sacred, and functional spaces. Temples in Mesopotamia were centers of economic activity, often controlling large estates, workshops, and fields. They were not only places of worship, but also hubs of production and distribution, integral to urban life. Grain collected at temples could be used to pay workers, feed priests, or support temple-sponsored projects. You move along a long, straight walkway leading to the main shrine. The walls here are higher, baked bricks more uniform, and traces of plaster hint at painted reliefs. Some scenes may have depicted divine figures, mythological stories, or ceremonial processions, designed to convey authority and devotion. The visual hierarchy of architecture guides your eye upward, emphasizing verticality and sacredness, culminating in the temple sanctuary at the top. Historians still debate the precise symbolism of ziggurats. Were they meant primarily as bridges between heaven and earth, as literal houses for gods, or as symbolic representations of cosmic order? The evidence suggests they served all three purposes simultaneously, blending theology, politics, and urban identity into a single architectural statement. A light joke floats into your imagination. You might picture a priest muttering, "If the god doesn't like this angle, we'll repaint tomorrow," highlighting that even sacred architecture sometimes contended with human fussiness. You step into a smaller side courtyard, likely used by temple attendants or apprentices. These courtyards are simple but functional. Storage rooms line the walls, small stairs lead to upper platforms, and drainage channels keep the floors dry. Here, you can almost see scribes working on clay tablets, priests counting offerings, or novices quietly practicing rituals. The architecture supports a rhythm of sacred life that is both disciplined and enduring. Some ziggurats incorporated small, almost hidden passageways, possibly for priests to move discreetly between ritual spaces. These narrow corridors suggest that even in monumental structures, private movement and controlled access were important, blending secrecy, hierarchy, and sacred practice. As you walk along a terrace, the city spreads below. The rooftops, courtyards, and streets form a geometric mosaic anchored by the temple towers. The view emphasizes how religious architecture integrates with the urban landscape, acting as a visual and functional pivot for city life. Streets seem oriented towards sacred axes, ensuring that movement through the city reinforces the presence and authority of the divine. You pause to consider the interplay between religion and daily life. Temples shape the city's rhythm. Festivals, offerings, and market schedules often revolved around religious calendars. Architecture facilitated these cycles. Courtyards allowed congregations to gather, stairways framed processions, and storage rooms held the resources that powered both worship and civic support. A light joke drifts through your mind. Some priest probably muttered after a long day, "If I see one more sheep offering in the wrong courtyard, I might start an indoor petting zoo." Even in ancient devotion, there's room for humor. You move toward the temple's outer walls, where smaller annexes likely housed administrative offices. These rooms are less grand, but equally vital. Clay tablets record rations, labor assignments, and trade goods. Courtyards here are enclosed and quiet, providing space for contemplation and record-keeping alike. The architecture supports both sacred and practical needs, balancing awe with efficiency. In some temple precincts, small figurines of mythological creatures were embedded in walls, possibly to protect sacred spaces or amuse worshippers. Imagine spotting a tiny clay lion in the corner of a grand hall and wondering whether it was divine guardian, inside joke, or both. As you exit the religious district, the night air is calm, carrying faint echoes of ritual chants, even if only in imagination. The streets now lead back toward residential quarters, yet the memory of temples lingers. Massive stepped platforms, ceremonial courtyards, sacred gardens, and the subtle integration of faith into every layer of city life. Architecture here is not just stone and brick, it is devotion, rhythm, and governance intertwined. You leave the religious districts behind and start wandering toward the city's defensive edges, where walls, gates, and fortifications define both boundary and identity. The streets here are quieter now, the hum of daily life replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible stillness. Moonlight glints off mud-brick battlements and the gentle curves of defensive towers, casting long, soft shadows across the streets and fields beyond. Mesopotamian cities were often surrounded by substantial mud-brick walls, sometimes reinforced with towers at intervals, designed to protect against invasion and flooding. These walls could be several meters thick, with walkways for guards and crenellated parapets for observation. Gates were carefully constructed choke points, controlling access and providing both security and ceremonial entry. As you walk closer to the wall, you notice the imposing yet quiet elegance of its construction. Layers of sun-dried and baked bricks alternate for strength, and subtle channels allow rainwater to drain without eroding the structure. The wall is not just a barrier, it's a testament to communal effort, organization, and foresight. Families and laborers alike would have contributed over months or years, shaping both defense and urban pride. Archaeologists have found tiny clay amulets embedded in walls or towers, perhaps as protection charms or ritual offerings to safeguard the city. You can picture a worker, hammer in hand, pausing to slip a small figure of a lion into a crevice, whispering, "Guard us while I nap." These quiet, almost whimsical gestures humanize otherwise austere architecture. Historians still debate the exact military efficacy of these walls. Some argue they were formidable deterrents against armies. Others suggest they were symbolic, reinforcing civic pride and the ruler's authority as much as they defended against attackers. Likely, they served both functions, blending practical defense with psychological assurance. You approach a city gate, a monumental yet serene structure now asleep in moonlight. Thick wooden doors reinforced with bronze studs would have once swung open and closed to admit merchants, messengers, or officials. A raised platform above the gate allowed guards to observe the surrounding countryside and control entry. You can almost hear the faint echo of footsteps, the creak of hinges, and the distant bray of a donkey caravan arriving at dawn. A second quirky fact, some gates contain small niches or hidden compartments where coins or charms were tucked, perhaps as offerings to ensure safe passage or blessings for travelers. Imagine a merchant slipping a tiny token into the gate's brickwork before embarking on a risky journey. Ancient luck baked into mud and clay. As you walk along the top of the wall, the city sprawls below like a miniature model. Courtyards, canals, rooftops, and streets blend into a tapestry of life. From here, you can see how the residential quarters, marketplaces, industrial areas, and temples interconnect in a network of human activity, all contained within the protective embrace of the walls. This perspective reinforces how urban planning and architecture were inseparable from defense and governance. You descend a narrow stairway into a smaller corridor, likely a patrol path along the inner side of the wall. Courtyards and minor streets run beneath you, creating layers of architecture that mix private and public, sacred and utilitarian. The design emphasizes both surveillance and accessibility, balancing the city's safety with daily life. Fortified gates and walls often doubled as administrative centers, controlling trade, taxation, and civic order. Guards would record arrivals and departures, merchants would pay tolls or tribute, and the city's leadership could monitor who entered or left. Architecture here serves multiple functions, blending security with bureaucracy. You follow the wall toward a corner tower, now silent and cool in the night. By day, guards would climb these towers, scanning the horizon for potential threats. By night, the structure is almost meditative, a place of watchfulness turned quiet reflection. The thick mud brick walls absorb sound, creating a hushed atmosphere. A quirky detail: some towers included small storage niches for water, provisions, or ceremonial offerings. Picture a guard taking a sip from a hidden clay jar while whispering a quick prayer for safety. Even these pragmatic spaces carried layers of ritual and human presence. Historians still argue whether towers were used primarily for defense or as symbolic markers of authority and prestige. While practical evidence supports their role in surveillance and archery, inscriptions and urban planning suggest they also reinforced civic identity. Either way, they are enduring markers of both vigilance and design. You continue along a narrow path at the base of the wall, moving past small courtyards that likely belong to families living in proximity to the fortifications. Some houses have thickened outer walls facing the city gates, creating a subtle buffer between domestic life and civic defense. You notice small windows high on the walls, designed more for observation than for decoration or light. Architecture merges protection with habitation, creating a continuous dialogue between the private and the public. Excavations suggest that some homes near gates incorporated hidden compartments or escape routes, small tunnels leading beneath walls or into neighboring courtyards. Perhaps it was practical precaution, perhaps playful ingenuity. Either way, the spirit of clever problem-solving is evident. Walking along, the air carries a faint scent of baked mud and river silt. Beyond the walls, you can glimpse fields, canals, and open land where city influence tapers into the surrounding landscape. These outer areas are quieter, shaped by irrigation, agriculture, and occasional paths for travelers. From the perspective of the wall, the city feels like a living organism, its life sustained both internally and by its connection to the land beyond. A light joke enters your mind. A sentry probably muttered centuries ago, "If one more goat wanders near the gate, I'll start issuing tickets." Humor is timeless, and human life leaves traces even in monumental architecture. As you reach the final stretch of the wall, you notice small ceremonial platforms built into corners or near gates. These may have been used for public announcements, ritual offerings, or seasonal observances. Architecture here blends functionality with social life. The same platforms protect, observe, and provide space for civic and religious expression. You pause to look back over the city. From the walls, it's clear how Mesopotamian architecture integrates urban planning, defense, civic life, and ritual practice. Palaces, temples, workshops, houses, marketplaces, all connected by streets, canals, and courtyards, framed by walls that protect and define. The city is alive even in its stillness, a testament to centuries of planning, labor, and human creativity. A final quirky thought drifts in. Some worker may have placed a tiny clay figurine atop the battlements as a joke, a silent witness to centuries of activity, reminding future observers that even the most serious work could carry a touch of whimsy. You step back from the wall, letting the cool night air brush against your face. The city sprawls below, quiet and ordered, its rhythms preserved in mud brick, mortar, and the careful geometry of streets, courtyards, and fortifications. The walls aren't just barriers, they are storytellers, guardians of both life and legacy. You move away from the outer walls and begin to drift toward the edges of the city where human habitation blends gently with the natural landscape. Here, streets become less rigid, and courtyards open into fields, gardens, and small groves. The hum of civilization softens, replaced by the whisper of wind through reeds and the faint ripple of canal water. It's a quiet threshold between the carefully constructed urban world and the wider Mesopotamian plains beyond. A mainstream historical fact anchors your vision. Mesopotamian cities were carefully integrated into their environments, balancing the need for protection, cultivation, and access to water. Canals, dikes, and embankments were both functional and aesthetic, guiding both irrigation and movement, while streets and courtyards reflected centuries of accumulated urban experience. Even the seemingly chaotic jumble of lanes and alleys often followed subtle patterns shaped by trade routes, sunlight, wind, and the river's seasonal shifts. You wander past small garden plots tucked behind outer homes. Some have simple rows of vegetables, others boast fruit trees or ornamental plants. Courtyards here are intimate, shaded, and practical, with water channels running discreetly along walls to nourish flora. Flat rooftops double as terraces, drying areas for grain, or places for quiet conversation under the stars. Architecture and nature are intertwined seamlessly, revealing a sophisticated understanding of both human comfort and environmental management. Archaeologists have found tiny clay models of gardens and animals buried under foundations, perhaps as protective charms or aspirational symbols. Imagine a family placing a miniature orchard under a corner of their home, silently hoping for abundance while the city's grand architecture hummed around them. It's a subtle, human touch, a small act of hope preserved through millennia. Historians still argue whether these miniature garden offerings were religious, aesthetic, or merely playful. Some scholars see them as devotional acts tied to fertility cults, while others argue they were personal, domestic expressions of care and imagination. Either interpretation adds layers of meaning to the city's design. You move further toward the riverbanks, where the Tigris or Euphrates flows quietly under the night sky. Mud and reeds line the edges, and the faint glimmer of water reflects stars as if the heavens themselves were mirrored in the river. Small docks and landing areas, long since abandoned, hint at a past where boats ferried goods, people, and ideas into the city. These spaces remind you that Mesopotamian architecture was not confined to bricks and mortar. It extended fluidly into the landscape, creating a dynamic dialogue between human settlement and natural environment. Rivers were the lifeblood of Mesopotamian cities, providing water for drinking, irrigation, transport, and trade. Architecture adapted to these waterways, with docks, canals, and terraces designed to manage both flood and drought. Homes near the banks often incorporated elevated platforms or small canals to channel water efficiently. You pause on a small embankment, feeling the cool night air brush your skin. The rhythm of life here is subtle. Distant waterfowl, the rustle of reeds, a faint croak of a frog. It's far removed from the palace, ziggurat, or bustling marketplace, yet it carries the essence of the city. Architecture, after all, is not only about walls and roofs, it's about creating spaces that interact with daily life, nature, and human perception. Some riverbank homes had small, hidden niches or clay tablets embedded in foundations, recording water rights, family ownership, or simple messages. Imagine slipping a tiny tablet under your doorstep, confident that it will silently preserve your claim for generations. A quiet testament to organization, foresight, and human habit. You stroll along a canal lined with reeds, noticing how subtle embankments direct water into small courtyards, gardens, and workshops. These canals are modest compared to the city's main waterways, yet they sustain life quietly and effectively. Architecture, water management, and landscape merge seamlessly, shaping how people live, work, and rest. Historians still debate whether these small-scale canal systems were primarily state-managed or locally maintained. Evidence suggests a hybrid approach. Local families maintained personal channels while the city oversaw major waterways, creating a collaborative network of management and responsibility. As you walk, the city behind you becomes a layered mosaic. The silhouettes of temples and palaces, the quiet forms of workshops and homes, and the protective walls that have guided generations. The further you move, the more you appreciate the integration of functional, aesthetic, and social elements in Mesopotamian architecture. Streets, courtyards, canals, gardens, and rooftops all contribute to a cohesive urban organism. You approach a small grove where trees whisper in the night wind. Some trees may have been fruit-bearing, others purely ornamental. Courtyards here are irregular yet intimate, designed to create privacy, shade, and beauty. Flat rooftops are used to dry crops, enjoy cool evenings, or simply observe the stars. The city's edge feels like a liminal space where urban planning meets natural rhythm and life flows gently from human construction into the wider landscape. A light joke drifts into your thoughts. Centuries ago, a Mesopotamian child probably ran through these groves chasing a chicken or duck, making a mess of a carefully tended garden. Some patterns of youthful mischief are eternal. You pause at a terrace overlooking the river, taking in the panorama. Rooftops fade into gardens, then into the flat expanse of fields, canals, and distant riverbanks. The city breathes in layers, and architecture serves as both skeleton and skin, shaping the flow of life while allowing the environment to remain visible, present, and respected. Mesopotamian urban design often reflected cosmic or symbolic considerations, aligning temples, gates, and streets with cardinal directions or seasonal cycles. Even at the quiet edges, these patterns subtly structure the landscape, connecting private life, civic order, and spiritual observance in ways that may have been invisible to casual observers but deeply meaningful to inhabitants. Small clay figurines or tokens embedded in outer walls, rooftops, or foundations often depict animals, humans, or mythological beings, reminding us that even at the city's periphery, people infuse their environment with humor, ritual, and personal meaning. Imagine stumbling across a tiny clay duck tucked beneath a terrace, placed by someone centuries ago who wanted the riverbank to feel less lonely. Now, as you step slowly back from the river, the night deepens. The city stretches behind you. Palaces, temples, workshops, markets, homes, canals, gardens, and walls. A living organism built from mud, water, labor, and imagination. You reflect on the quiet wonder of Mesopotamian architecture, where function, devotion, domestic life, and natural environment intertwine seamlessly. The city exhales around you, and you feel the rhythm of countless lives. Workers, priests, merchants, farmers, families, moving through courtyards, streets, and rooftops. Everything connects, walls to water, homes to workshops, temples to markets. Each layer of architecture tells a story, not just of construction, but of care, ingenuity, and the slow, deliberate shaping of a civilization. Now, as you let your gaze linger on the river and the city beyond, the pace of narration slows. Imagine yourself reclining on a quiet rooftop or beside a gentle canal, feeling the cool night air and hearing only the faint whisper of water, reeds, and wind. Let the soft rhythm of streets, courtyards, canals, and walls lull you, as though the city itself is exhaling with you. The monumental structures and the tiny residential niches, the grand temples and the hidden charms all fade into a harmonious pattern of tranquility. Rest in this quiet space. Let the distant sound of water and the gentle hum of moonlit streets carry you into ease. The city of Mudbrick, canals, and human care becomes a cocoon around your mind, slowing thought and softening perception. You may feel your body sink slightly into your pillow, your breathing matching the quiet pulse of the city. The wonders of Mesopotamian architecture, both grand and modest, settle into your imagination, comforting and unhurried. Allow the night to stretch gently around you, the textures, sounds, and shadows softening further. Each roof, courtyard, canal, and garden whispers a lullaby of ingenuity, care, and continuity. Drift along the riverbanks, past temples and markets, into courtyards and rooftops, carrying the quiet story with you into sleep. Now, let yourself breathe slowly, softly, as the city's edges dissolve into the night. The moon glints faintly off the canal water, the reeds sway with gentle rhythm, and distant rooftops merge into shadows. Everything feels expansive yet safe. You are cradled by centuries of human care, where walls, courtyards, canals, and gardens gently support life. Palaces, temples, and workshops seem distant now, their presence quieted into soft silhouettes under the starry sky. Feel the warmth of mud brick walls and the cool of water channels, blending seamlessly in your imagination. You can almost hear the subtle creak of a door, the faint laughter of children, or the whisper of wind through a leafy grove. Let these gentle sounds anchor you. The city moves slowly around you, deliberate yet unhurried, guiding your thoughts toward rest. The intricate weave of architecture, grand and humble, sacred and domestic, fades into a comforting pattern. Imagine stepping lightly across rooftops, through quiet courtyards, past temples and markets, letting each detail gently sink into your awareness. The rhythm of life slows, each breath syncing with the soft pulse of streets, canals, and gardens. Now, let your mind release tension, softening into the quiet city night. You are safe, cradled by centuries of thoughtful design and care. Drift with a slow current of imagination through mud brick, canals, courtyards, and riverbanks until your eyes close and the whispers of Mesopotamian architecture carry you fully into gentle sleep.
End of script. Sweet dreams.